Hello, my name is Pamela Mitzi, Director of the Prevention Resource Center at South Oaks Hospital. The PRC makes prevention science a reality in changing the lives of families and communities here in Suffolk. We are here to prove prevention works. In today's times, parents are often caught off guard when it comes to alcohol and drug use in their children's lives. As caretakers, we are prepared to protect our children's well-being, but are often less than ready to deal effectively with alcohol and other drug abuse or the disease of addiction. Suffolk's Prevention Resource Center has produced a series of informative videos that will equip parents with the tools vital in fostering positive outcomes when detecting and addressing substance abuse issues in the home. Some of Suffolk's best practitioners will share their expertise regarding children's alcohol and other drug use. One module explores the why and how of parents having a plan to intervene in their children's lives. Another is about how to approach a child who you suspect is using, and then how to improve their readiness for treatment. The last module provides a perspective on the effects of substance abuse on the family system. Barry, thanks so much for coming in today. We're here to talk about the things that you've learned with so many years in the field and treating so many different clients and patients with diseases of addiction. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you've learned? Tell us the very most important things that you've learned about dealing with family members who have the disease of alcoholism or addiction.
Well, I've been in the field about 12 years, and as a direct line counselor in the addiction treatment center, I probably had about 11,000 patients come in. And not only have I dealt with them, but their family members, their parents, their children, their significant others, their friends. And one of the things I've learned is how everybody's different. Sometimes people think clinicians are going to peg everybody as a sort of cookie-cutter approach to treatment. Everybody's different, but addiction is very predictable. It's progressive, it's predictable, and so is the recovery process, so is sobriety. And sometimes people get used to looking at the addiction, but not the sobriety. I guess I've had patients from 13 years old to 87 years old, black, white, Hispanic, other, every race, religion, ethnicity, walk of life. I'm surprised sometimes how much of a stigma there still is. I'm so used to dealing with this. I think addiction is probably the most democratic thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm constantly amazed at no matter how different everybody is, how predictable addiction not only affects the people who drink and drug, but how predictably and progressively it affects the family too.
Give us a little bit of advice for those family members who are dealing with someone near and dear to them who has a problem with drinking or using drugs.
Where it would start is getting educated, becoming aware of how this disease affects the family. And so many people come from a place where they hold on to the stigma. We're not supposed to talk about these things. We shouldn't discuss it. It's embarrassing. It's very hard for people to be open and honest. And what we can do to foster an environment where people can do that, whether it's treatment, counseling, self-help groups. I had a father come to me angrily. I was suggesting support systems. Al-Anon is the parent group of all the 12-step groups that help people address how they've been affected by somebody else's drinking and using drugs. And this father says, why should I go to Al-Anon meetings? My son has the problem. I said, to keep yourself sane. He says, oh, I never thought of that. And I'm going to tell you that sometimes the family members have just as much a tenuous grasp on sanity as anybody who's drinking and drugging. In the 11,000 patients that I've directly dealt with, I've had their family members come in with complaints of anxiety, depression, insomnia, impaired job performance, inability to concentrate, bad driving, obsession, compulsion, working too much, eating too much. Sometimes the symptoms the family presents are more pronounced than the symptoms in the person who's drinking and using drugs.
And so what should they do in that case?
I think they should start addressing it and stop pretending. I spoke to a mother this morning, someone who called me on the phone, of her child is beginning to get treatment. And the mother is very, very frightened, and why shouldn't she be? This is very scary. And I started explaining this exact thing to the mom, how the family members get sucked in, and start to lose themselves as they revolve around the person who's drinking and drugging. And he says, well, she can see that in the family, but she says, but she comes from hardy stock, she said. And I said, Mom, I've been studying addiction for a long time, and you can't tell me you're not terrified. And then she actually opened up a little bit, and she admitted she was. But I think people have to get rid of the notion that somehow they're not affected by this. And sobriety is a term that doesn't just deal with the person who's drinking or using drugs, but sobriety occurs in the family as well. And with all this blaming, I watch TV and there's all these commercials on. You go to this seminar over the weekend, or you read this book, or you take this pill, and I think everybody is so busy pointing their fingers and looking for shortcuts and quick solutions to something that's really by nature long and slow. Sobriety is a long and slow process. It's uncomfortable. We're asking someone who drinks and drugs to give up what they're used to. They get very uncomfortable, and they look for that instant fix when nothing's wrong. Sometimes for the family members, they get used to being the babysitter and the private investigator. And geez, I've met parents who become children, children become parents, and spouses who become the local FBI agent in the house. And sometimes when people get into recovery and things are going well, that's very uncomfortable, because then the family has to give up the roles they're used to. And I think this constant search for shortcuts and ways to avoid being uncomfortable, it doesn't help. In fact, I think the hardest thing to do, whether you're an alcoholic or a family member, is to embrace being uncomfortable, because I don't think there's a way to recover, especially as a family, without a lot of change, and it's very uncomfortable.
All right, so I'm the family member. You're telling me to go get educated about the disease. What else am I supposed to be learning?
Sometimes the family members need to learn and need a lot of help to stop taking personally the attitudes and behaviors of someone who's drinking and using drugs. And even in sobriety, since it's long and slow and progressive, the attitudes don't change that quickly either. And it's hard to set guidelines, it's hard to set boundaries when you're used to threatening and saying things but not meaning them. And I think people need a lot of support to find their own strength, to set guidelines, to set boundaries. Because people who drink and use drugs, people who become addicted, there are a lot of things. One thing they're not is stupid, you know, and sometimes the family members fall into the trap of being so easily manipulated. And I think if family members are using good support systems, they'll find themselves less likely to be manipulated, less likely to take the attitudes and behaviors personally, less likely to try to shake and threaten and force somebody into sobriety. And I think as the family members work on their own health and their own sanity, it sort of forces their children even to reach out for help. They're not manipulating the family that well either.
So I have a minor child who is experienced with drugs and alcohol and has been through a treatment attempt or two. And okay, so now I'm trying to educate myself, and I'm looking for some support, and I'm trying to communicate better, but is there something more I need to do? I mean, I'm still the parent and they're still the child, and they don't want to follow any rules.
That's for sure, with or without drinking or drugs, that's for sure. And I think that if there's going to be recovery, it is essential that the family be involved. With a child, minor or not, who's living at home, the whole family is certainly affected by drinking and drugging. The whole family is going to be affected by recovery. And if the child is in treatment, I think it's of utter importance that the family is involved in treatment as well with the child. It's not just the child who has to now learn how to communicate openly and be honest, but the family has to learn how to address that child now in a way differently than they used to. And it's very, very hard to get everybody on the same page. But certainly there should be rules and guidelines, and the key is that if conditions are set up for continued privileges at home, that they're enforced. That the child has to understand that consistency and boundaries and openness and honesty is going to start with you. The family is the last place recovery really shows. That open, honest communication, not taking things personally, permitting uncomfortability and letting go of control. It's easy to talk. But the whole family has to be involved in it. Otherwise, I don't think the child has a chance.
So that means it's very important for everybody to be working towards some of the same goals.
If the solution was a seminar or reading that book or taking that pill, wouldn't it be nice? You know, you can have a nice weekend and be recovered. But I don't go for the shortcuts. And I do think that the whole family has to very uncomfortably practice openness and honesty. And I think we all come from families, many of us come from families where we don't talk about these things, where we hold on to the guilt and shame. And it's so hard to let go of. And support systems really help people do that. A lot of times, people know that people who drink and use drugs are referred to AA and 12-step programs for their support, but the family members then feel all alone. They feel so unsupported. And that's why I can't say enough about Al-Anon and groups that have come from Al-Anon.
So tell me a little bit more about Al-Anon or finding a support group. What happened? You just walk in? I mean, you have to find a place to go, and then you just show up?
Well, nowadays with the internet, it's pretty easy to find Al-Anon. AA has hundreds of groups in nearby. Al-Anon is a smaller fellowship. And I can't quote numbers, but they're all over Nassau and Suffolk County. They are absolutely free. It's not therapy. It's not professional help. It's a place for families and friends and anyone who's been affected to lose their uniqueness, to feel supported, to get this education. And I think a combination of treatment and a support system like Al-Anon is a very effective tool, not only to help the family, but just like active addiction and the attitudes affect everybody, so does recovery. And if the family members are working on their recovery, that affects people too, even the alcoholic. So I'm a real believer in that. Recovery isn't just going to a 5-day detox, a 28-day rehab, a 6-month residential program. Recovery is a long, slow progress on the attitudes.
Right. So you're saying that we all have to work together to find the solutions to this disease process.
Well, we can continue to blame the children and the parents and the media and the schools, or we can all see the role we all play in it. And I think as people buy that this is really a disease that affects everybody, it's easier to say, yeah, I play a role in it, because it's not because anybody, the alcoholic or the family member, is bad or defective. It's because they've been affected by this.
I see what you mean, that people react to the attitudes, not to the person. And so if you do take that personally, it does hurt if you're being cursed out or ignored or manipulated. But if you can make the distinction between the family member who is still there and that you do love, and the attitudes that are exhibited as a result of the disease, it might be easier to understand.
And I would never minimize the plight of the family. It takes them maybe even a longer time to get used to the recovery process, because they might have been pent up with all sorts of feelings they haven't been numbing with alcohol and drugs. And they start coming out.
Right.
And sometimes I have told the alcoholic not to take their family personally. Usually when people are frightened, they become very controlling. And so when I meet controlling, angry, manipulative people, usually I see very frightened people. And I think no matter how different everybody is, if there's addiction going on in a family, I think there's a lot of fear.
Right. That's a great point to emphasize, that everybody's unique, but the disease process is really very, very similar. So as a professional, you can see the difference between the person, the unique individual, and the disease process in its active state.
The most important thing I can impress on anybody, family member, child, anybody who's drinking and drugging, is that this is bigger, than a choice. Nobody chooses to live this way. That having the best of intentions and meaning well and loving your child isn't going to get anybody sober. That people with the best of intentions, if they are not educated on alcoholism and the predictable sobriety process, the best of intentions might still engage in very damaging and irrational behavior. So I think it starts with awareness and openness and discussing it, which is hard to do when you're busy pointing the finger at the schools and the parents and
Right. But that's why people go to self-help, to find out how to become stronger themselves, to realize the difference between what somebody else is doing, what you can control and what you can't control.
I think the best contribution of the 12-step movement, AA and Al-Anon meetings, being the parent groups, is that it gives people hope.
Right.
And it's important for people to understand and study addiction, drinking, and drugs. There's lots of material, especially lately in the newspapers. But I think it's important for people to go to those self-help groups to study sobriety and take a look at what that's about.
So you're really talking about working on yourself.
And taking your expectations of a short, quick process away.
Right. There's no such thing as a quick fix.
I was taught that a good clinician, a good counselor, a good social worker is someone who works on themselves. And that makes it possible to offer help to other people. I think it's the same for a parent to a child.
Right. Sounds good.
Well, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in, sharing your expertise. We hope you've learned valuable strategies from our discussion that can be used to benefit your family. By planning to prevent, we best prepare to protect. I'm your host, Pamela Mitzi, and thank you for joining us here at the Prevention Resource Center, where we prove prevention works. For questions, comments, or suggestions for additional learning modules, please email us by clicking on Contact PRC here on our site.